So now we're going to get into, what are some of the unique capabilities that we have that we think we can tackle some of the threats that we've just been talking about. And obviously, top of the agenda is really the number one threat right now is phishing and ransomware. That's primarily, the way that, phishing being the way that folks get access to endpoints through social engineering, getting people to click on things, and then ransomware is the primary monetization vehicle. And obviously, the primary defenses that we have against that today are trying to stop the threats from getting to the endpoint in the first place. If we can detect threats in the email gateway or detect threats in the HTTP proxy, looking at network traffic, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, we try and stop things from getting into the endpoint. And then when they get on the endpoint, we're then relying on our antivirus or on our EDR or MDR service to try and detect the threat. And the challenge is that detection is hard. The bad guys are, for all of these detection-based tools, part of the supply chain for those organizations is that they actually have their own test labs, their own QA labs, where they have all of these tools, all of these detection tools, and they just view it as part of the QA process, that when they come up with a new variant of malware, to run it through their QA lab to check that nobody can detect it at that point in time. And then, of course, it's a question of whether, how quickly the various security companies can update their software to be able to detect it. But it can go hidden for hours, days, weeks, in some cases months. So what can we do to try and detect against these common threats that is going to be a more robust approach? And that led to the creation of what we call SureClick. It actually comes from a company, Bromium, that I founded back in 2011, where the idea is how do we make it so we're not reliant on detection? And the way that works is that we use virtual machines or disposable virtual machines running on the endpoint device, such that if I click to open an email attachment, high risk activity like that, I'm going to create a disposable virtual machine which I'm going to use just for that task. And then into that virtual machine, I'm going to put that document, supposing it's a Word document, and then start Word within that virtual machine to render that document. And then I'm going to take the pixels that are produced and then put them onto my Windows desktop display, so that from a user experience point of view, it's kind of unchanged. It's just which everything is taking place within this virtual machine. So that means that if I click on various documents, web pages, etc., they're all going to open in their own virtual machine. But if one of them turns out to be malicious, and it will have been missed by AV or EDR, and supposing it compromises the application, in this case, Excel spreadsheet that's compromised Excel, and then that malware may go on to use a second stage exploit to try and compromise the operating system. It might try and persist itself by modifying the file system or registry. But all of the changes it's making are all within that virtual machine. It's having no impact on the underlying physical system. It's having no impact on the other virtual machines that are running. And within that virtual machine, we've been able to implement what's called the principle of least privilege. So that virtual machine doesn't have access to any of my other documents. It doesn't have access even to my identity. It doesn't know who I am or even who owns this machine. There's no credentials in there to steal, no password hashes. So there's nothing of value within that VM for an attacker to steal. Anything that's present within there is just all sort of fake data, honeypot data that we don't care whether it gets lost or whether it gets encrypted. So if you think about that for a moment, the attacker thinks they've succeeded. The user clicked on their Excel spreadsheet. The Excel spreadsheet compromised Excel. They've then used their other exploits to compromise the virtual machine. They might have exfiltrated any documents that were present inside there. They then may have encrypted them. But actually, they haven't caused any harm. There was nothing of value to steal. There was no way for them to infect the real physical machine. And then as soon as I finish reading that document, I'm going to click close on it, and that virtual machine is going to be discarded. And so now we're back to a clean state again. The malware has not been able to persist on the system. So this is a very different way of solving the problem rather than just relying on detection alone. So, antivirus and EDR had their opportunity to try and spot something was bad, failed to do so, but then it opened within a virtual machine anyway, and then any threat from that attack was contained within the virtual machine and then disposed of. So net result is that users can make mistakes, they can click on things, but there's no impact from it, no lasting impact from it. So let's actually just do a little demo and see what that looks like. So this is just my regular, the monitor is gone. Let's duplicate the screen. Okay. So it's just my regular machine. I've got a web browser open, bunch of different tabs open in this web browser. I've got various PDF files, Excel spreadsheets, PowerPoint files open. And what I'm going to do is open an application which isn't something that a user would normally see, but it's useful for giving demos to show what's going on under the covers. We call it Live View. And if I go down here, it's telling me that right now, there are 23 virtual machines running on my laptop, of which 7 are associated with all the documents I have open, and 16 associated with the various websites I have open. So if I was to go here and sort of scroll down, you can see each of these virtual machines. So for each tab in Chrome, we've got Excel, PowerPoint, a couple of different PDF files, all open in their own virtual machine. So effectively, everything is isolated from each other. And let's look at an example of where that matters. So, I've opened up Outlook here. Supposing somebody has sent me an email with a link in Outlook. If I click to open that link, then my browser comes to the front and it's going to create a new virtual machine number 30, and it's told the browser in that virtual machine to go to that website, and the browser has then reached out to all of the various servers on the internet that are delivering content associated with that website, all the different marketing networks and everything that's going on, everything that normally happens, but it's all happening within that virtual machine. And then the content is rendered, and I can interact with it just as I would do normally. I wouldn't notice that anything was different there. I can click on links. If I click on a link taking me to a different website, it'll create a new virtual machine to go to that website. So I've effectively been able to view this content in a way that hasn't exposed my machine to any potential harm, because it's all happening within this disposable virtual machine. So let's look at an example, go back to Outlook. Supposing someone has sent me a Word document. We can open that Word document. And that has opened in micro VM number 31. And again, I can interact with that document normally. I can go in there and make edits. I can save the document. I could send it to somebody. When they open it, if they're using the product, it's going to open within a virtual machine. But if that document was malicious, it's going to be contained within the virtual machine. So we've got a few seconds. I'm just going to show you what it looks like inside the virtual machine. So I've got a sort of debug mode I think I can bring up with where I can open a command prompt inside the virtual machine. So you can see that's not on the desktop, it's just within the virtual machine. So first thing to notice is there's no user Ian on this machine. So none of my documents are present there. My identity isn't present. If I go into there's this BR user 1729, a randomly generated user, and I can see the various documents that are present here. Let's go into the documents directory. Now, these are fake documents. They're not my documents. They're just randomly generated documents that are present there. I don't care if these get stolen. There's nothing of value in there. There's none of my real documents, identity, credentials, password hashes. So if this Word document had turned out to be malicious, I've got nothing at risk. And then when I close the Word document, we'll see that virtual machine is disposed of. It's actually because one of the things I'll talk about in a second is we're actually watching what's happening within the virtual machine. We know what expected behavior is. Now, having a command shell appear in a virtual machine is unexpected. So it's actually collecting a whole bunch of forensic information from it. So I'll leave it doing that. But if we look at another example, let's take an example of supposing somebody has sent us a document. In this case, it's someone applying for a job, sent us a Word document as a resume. And if I open this Word document, it's going to open in a new virtual machine number 32. Now, I actually need to interact with this document to sort of wake the malware up. It's actually a fairly simple piece of crypto malware. It's just going to display a ransom note. But it's evading detection in the email gateway and in Office 365 where it's being scanned daily because it does a good job of hiding from detection. But that doesn't matter here because I've opened it, it's opened in a virtual machine. I've then interacted with it, which has triggered the malware. But this ransom note, if we look, is just within the Word document. It's not on my desktop. So it has encrypted those files which it found within the virtual machine. It may have exfiltrated them, but it hasn't done any harm. There's nothing of value within that virtual machine. And then when I click to close this document, the virtual machine will be disposed of, and it will have collected threat intelligence information. So we can kind of look at what kind of information is collected. Well, let's go to malware. So what we're able to do is whenever anything is running within a virtual machine, we're effectively standing outside, looking in, recording what's happening, recording this black box flight recorder trace of everything that's happening. And because this virtual machine was created for a specific purpose, in that case to render that Word document, we know what's supposed to be running within the virtual machine. If it deviates from that, we know that something interesting has happened. And so then what we're going to do is collect that flight recorder trace and start streaming that information to a management server, which could be in the cloud, if we're running it for you, or it could be on premise or in your cloud, where you get that trace of everything that's happened up to that point and then everything that goes on to happen. So you get to see how that attack plays out. So if we look at the threat dashboard and click on one of these threats to click on, we can see how the attack played out, and here mapping it to the MITRE attack framework, we can see all of the different tactics and techniques which that malware used. We can see what's called the process interaction graph of how Word, the malware took over Word and then generated these other processes, started using other system tools, doing what's called living off the land. Rather than installing its own binaries, it's using existing stuff within the installed on the system to perform its the later stages of its attack, to reduce the chances of it being detected. But it's easy for us to detect because it's doing something other than running Word. Therefore, we know something interesting has happened, so we're collecting that trace. And if you're the folks in the Security Operations Center, can then dig down to arbitrary levels of detail about exactly how the attack played out, all of the various system calls and API calls that the attack used. You've got all of the various files that were involved in the attack, sort of full behavioral analysis, all of the network traffic, and then we can see how did this attack start. Well, it started with an email, and then we have all of the headers associated with that with that email that delivered the payload. So you've got a whole bunch of forensic information which has been collected. But to some extent, none of that matters because the attack was stopped. It was contained within a virtual machine, and then the VM was thrown away. So it's not like the security folk have got anything to do. They haven't got to suddenly run around, trying to use this information, going looking for it on other machines. If everybody's using the product, then that you're protected. This is just interesting threat intelligence about what's happened. So it's quite different from conventional AV or EDR kind of tools where you might have just spotted a new indicator of compromise that you then have to go searching for. Here, the attack's been dealt with just by disposing of that VM. So the way that this works, let me just duplicate the screen again. Why is that not switching? Sorry about this. Where's the slideshow? There we go. Okay, so the way this works is whenever the user performs a risky activity, we're going to create a virtual machine to perform that activity. And the goal is to make this transparent to the user. So the virtual machine will just come into existence, that task will be performed within there. And the reason we're able to do this is we're using the CPU's ability to virtualize the environment. And that's come about as a result of work that we've done over a number of years with Intel and AMD to get them to build capabilities into the CPU that we can then take advantage of to enable us to run many virtual machines, with high performance on just a regular laptop. And within that virtual machine, there's going to be none of the real PC's environment. So none of the documents are going to be present there, none of the identity, credentials, files, etc. So nothing to steal. And then as soon as that task finishes, as soon as the user clicks close, we're going to dispose of that virtual machine. And The net result is that you're able to protect users from the common mistakes of clicking on things which you wish that they hadn't. So attacks coming in via email, if it's documents or other files as email attachments, or if it's links to malicious websites, if it's, we talked about how it was, Office documents, PDF files, browser attacks, all of those kind of things are going to be contained within virtual machines. However, they get onto the device. So whether they come via email, via chat, whether someone sends a file via a video conferencing client, or walks up to a machine with a USB stick, plugs it in and tries opening a file, a virtual machine is going to be created. So it's dealing with all of those common attack vectors. So the net result is that, our customers using this product, it's now actually over 50 billion documents, websites, things that they've clicked on which have opened in virtual machines. So the customers have clicked on 50 billion things, and during that entire time, we've had 0 reported breaches to us of anything escaping the virtual machine. So it really does get you to a very different security posture than if you're relying on detection-based approaches alone. Detection, maybe it's 95% effective, or maybe even we manage in future to get it to 97, 98%. There's a big difference between that and then just containing the threat such that even if you can't detect it, you can still be protected from it. So this capability we call SureClick. It's, as I say, developed originally by Bromium, the company I founded, is now a core part of the HP portfolio. And it doesn't just run on HP machines. Because it's as a result of work which we've done with the CPU vendors, those capabilities are actually built into every CPU. So if you have a machine from another vendor, those same capabilities are still there. They're just not used on those vendors' machines, but running our software on them enables those capabilities to be used to get this kind of defense. So far, we've talked about using virtualization to contain threats from risky activities. So you put the dangerous stuff in a cage or in a virtual machine, perhaps a different cage for every different risky activity you're performing. And the net result is, even if it's dangerous, it can't escape the cage and impact your real system. But there's also the opportunity to use virtualization, using these capabilities built into the CPU, to use it to provide an additional layer of protection for the applications and data that you care most about. So it's kind of putting the things you care most about in if you like, a defensive cage, such that even if, for whatever reason, your Windows OS, your endpoint OS gets compromised, for whatever reason, it might be a malicious administrator, or actually, a few weeks ago we saw an organization that had, the attackers had got control of their SCCM infrastructure and used it to push malware to all of their machines. These kind of things happen. But what you would like to be able to do is, even if something like that has happened, to be able to have an additional layer of protection for the things you care most about. And depending on the organization, that could be different kind of applications. So there are government customers that we work with that run the applications that they use to read classified documents within these protected virtual machines, which are protected from a confidentiality and integrity point of view, such that even if their endpoint is compromised, we know that what's taking place within that protected VM is still going to be secure. So nobody can extract the classified document. They can't even take a screenshot showing the document. They can't sort of inject keystrokes into it to try and edit the document. You're able to keep that isolated. Similarly, we work with some banking customers that, they find that one of their most commonly attacked applications, once an attacker has got into their environment, they're trying to get onto the machines of people that have access to the SWIFT wire transfer network. Because what they do is they wait for the user to log in to the website into SWIFT using their two-factor authentication. And then while the user is doing legitimate transactions on that website, moving money around, in the background, they are using the access that they have to the cookies, etc., to generate bonus transactions that are moving money to accounts that they control. And there's, there are malware families specifically designed for doing that, for taking advantage of the access that the user has to move money around. But if you're doing that interaction with Swift within one of these protected VMs, then there's no way that malware running on the Windows OS, on the endpoint OS, can interact with anything within one of these protected VMs, because the CPU is using this ability to isolate the memory, isolate the I/O, to stop any interaction. And so that a user can only interact with it using the physically connected keyboard. The information is being displayed on the locally attached monitor. There's no visibility to it. If you were trying to remote control that PC, using RDP or any of the sort of remote access toolkits which bad guys have that are more stealthy than RDP, all you would see would be a black rectangle on the screen where that application was. You can't see it, you can't interact with it, it's completely isolated from you. But one of the areas which we see that this technology is perhaps getting most adoption right now is actually for privileged users, because if you think about how many of the bad guys are targeting organizations, is they're going after the privileged users. They might be doing it by targeting them directly, by researching them on LinkedIn, or if they just compromise the machine of a random user, mess something up on it, wait for somebody to log into the machine to try and fix it, and then use that access to then get onto the machine of the person that's trying to fix it. That they're coming in, connecting into that machine to try and fix it, get onto that machine, and that might just be the machine of someone in the help desk. But then from there, if they can get onto the machine of someone with higher administrator privileges, that's their goal. And then when that person uses their device to log into some high-value service, the domain controller or the AWS Web Console, that is the jackpot for them, if they can then compromise the machine that they're logging into. And the way that they typically do that is, supposing I'm logging into the domain controller to administer it, I just use RDP to connect to it, and then I can use it as I would do as though I was sitting in front of it. Well, what the bad guys can do is just inject keystrokes into that session to be able to run commands on the remote machine. So, if there's interest, I can actually demo that, what it looks like, if anyone wants to see that. If not, I'll move on. You want to see it? Okay. So this is a common way that attacks go down. So what I'm going to do is attach to or connect via RDP to a domain controller. So I'm typing my password in. So first thing to notice is that if an attacker is on my machine, they will be able to capture that password if I'm just connecting to it using a regular RDP client. Everything I do on this machine can be logged. So they've got the password. Now, hopefully, you're using privileged access management, a product like CyberArk or something like that, where there will be two-factor authentication. I haven't bothered setting that up here, but hopefully now I'd be using my mobile phone to press a button to indicate that it's really me, and hopefully an attacker, even if they've got my password, wouldn't be able to do that part of it. But even if they've got my password and it's not useful to them, I'm now connected into the domain controller. So I've got the Active Directory administration console. I can let's make this a bit smaller. So I can, when I'm here, I can create new users. I can change the privileges associated with users, and we've got a list of users here that exist on the system. So an attacker on the machine that's on my endpoint can run arbitrary scripts. So we can see we could just run an arbitrary script here, and what this does is it just injects keystrokes into the session. And what it did there is it injected Windows R CMD, which brought up a command shell, and then it typed a command into the command shell to run the calculator. So the Windows calculator has just appeared in this window. So I didn't command that. That was all done in the background without me realizing that it was happening. This hacker just ran that script and it created a command, the calculator window. Now, that in of itself isn't particularly, it's scary, but it hasn't done any harm. But what I can now do is if I run this script, and again, you're not seeing anything flash up on screen, right? It all happens so quickly, you don't even notice. And that has actually created a backdoor user on this domain controller. So if I refresh the list of users, if I hit the refresh button, do you see I've got a new user, bad guy. And if we look at bad guy's properties, he is a member of, where is it? Member of domain admins. So that's a particularly clumsy way of creating a backdoor on a domain controller, but there are lots of far more subtle ways you can do it. And so now that attacker has got access to the domain controller whenever they want, having created this user account. And notice that we haven't exploited any vulnerability. There's no bug in RDP or Citrix ICA or PCOIP that we've exploited here to do that. We've just taken advantage of those applications and the fact that malware running on the endpoint is able to interact with those applications just like the user can. It can inject keystrokes. It injected a series of keystrokes to run commands on the server, which then caused a bad action to happen. So what do you do about this? Well, if you follow the recommended best practice, what you're supposed to do is to issue all of your admins with a second machine, what's called a privileged access workstation. And they should use that privileged access workstation only for doing these kind of high-value administrative activities. They should never read email on it. They should never browse the web. They should be really careful about what networks they connect it to. But most organizations don't bother doing this because it's the expense of having another machine. Admins don't like carrying another machine around with them. There's also the issue of, what actually is that machine actually kept secure? How do you know that they're not browsing the web on it or exposing it to attack? I actually know the one organization that had gone to the trouble of getting privileged access workstations issued to all of their admins. And of course, when COVID came around, many of those machines ended up being handed to their kids for homeschooling needs rather than being looked after in the way that was intended. So, there is a real challenge here. But if you don't do that, this is how the attack goes down. The attacker gets onto the admin's machine, waits for them to log into something high value, and then injects keystrokes to create a persistent backdoor. So how can you avoid this? Well, if we exit that, one of the things we can do is, if we, rather than connecting using the standard RDP app, if we connect using this protected application, which is running, let's see if I remember the password, running within a protected VM. So if we were to bring this up here, we can see that there's this new VM running, VM number 34, which is a protected VM. And we see that we can't show the screenshot of it because that software running on the endpoint can't see into that VM. So that's why there's a picture of a padlock there. It's completely separated. If we were on a Zoom call, I mean, this demo is hard to do over Zoom because you would just be seeing a black rectangle there. There's no visibility into what's happening in that window, unless I specifically disable it. And if an attacker tries to inject keystrokes into that window, it's not going to work because this window, the hypervisor ensures, and the hardware ensures, that this window only accepts keystrokes from the physically attached keyboard. So no way of doing that sort of injection attack. If I'm typing in here, the attacker doesn't get to see any of those keystrokes because the keystrokes go directly from the keyboard controller hardware into that VM. They don't pass through windows where somebody could capture them. So that environment is isolated from the underlying Windows system. Now in this example, for demo purposes, I've got it set up so that domain controller will accept both the normal unprotected connections and also these connections coming from these protected VMs. Of course, in reality, to be honest, that's how you would start deploying it, right? You would roll it out such that all of your admins then have a secure way alongside the insecure way. But as soon as you'd rolled it out to all of your admins, what you would then normally do is to change the configuration such that you can only connect in from a protected environment. You can't do it in the insecure way, so that users are only, your admins are only connecting in a secure fashion. And as well as doing this for things like a domain controller, other tier 0, tier 1 servers, you'd probably do it for things like the AWS web console, or perhaps if you're running payroll, using a payroll provider, with a website like ADP or whatever, you'd connect into those kind of applications within your finance department would be doing it within a secure environment. Whenever you know that it's an environment which is targeted by attackers, you want it to be done within a protected VM. And the other cool thing about this is that we're able to do something called attestation, which is being able to prove cryptographically to something that you're connecting to that you're doing it within a secure environment. And what we have to show is that we have to show the state of the hardware and the hypervisor, the virtualization software on the machine, and then the measurements of the application. And that's all of the information we need, because everything happening within Windows and that whole complicated mess of millions of lines of Windows code, different versions, different applications, it's all irrelevant because it can't impact anything happening within these protected VMs. And so for the first time, we can actually do proper attestation and know what we're talking to, so that some server that we're connecting to knows that it's talking to a secure environment. And that's something which has never been possible before. So anyway, this capability is relatively new. We've developed it in the last couple of years. There's lots of different use cases for it. But again, it's a capability which is only possible because of the work that we've done with the silicon vendors to build those capabilities into the CPU that we can then take advantage of. And there's a whole roadmap we have of additional things we can do in these protected VMs. So now let's move on, and we've kind of talked about the most common threats that are occurring. Malicious links and documents, we can open those in protected VMs. Other kinds of malware attack. We haven't really talked about credential phishing. That's an area where you're just trying to trick people to hand over their credentials. The way that, obviously, that is, we're trying to defend against that is encouraging people to use authenticator applications and other kinds of two-factor auth. But also, one of the things we've been able to do using machine learning, using the NPU that's built into machines now, is actually do image recognition. So what typically happens in these kind of attacks is a user clicks on something which takes them to a website that looks like the Microsoft login or the Adobe Sign login. And then they enter their credentials into that, and then the attacker's got those credentials. Hopefully, if you've got two-factor auth, that's not enough on its own. But using our image recognition, we're able to spot that this website looks like the Microsoft website, or looks like your bank's website, but it's not at the right URL. We know that it must be a fake version of that website that's trying to trick you. And then we're able to display a warning and encourage the user not to click. So those are the most common kinds of attack, all occurring in the operating system and the application layer. But we do increasingly see attacks which are occurring below the operating system. And some of these are, let's say, fairly niche in that they require physical access, physical access to a machine. So for example, if an attacker has physical access to a machine, there are a bunch of things they can do. But on a conventional machine, if they just plug a device into the USB-C Thunderbolt port and boot that machine, they can permanently compromise it. That's the case on competitive machines today. So that's a niche attack. But it does happen. It's usually a nation state targeted attack, particularly if you're traveling, traveling in Asia, leaving your laptop in a hotel room while you go out for dinner. It's those kind of occasions where if you're targeted, that kind of physical intrusion attack occurs. We also have seen destructive attacks or attacks which are intended to make the PC unusable, and also attacks that just disable security applications, again working below the operating system. So these are rarer, but they do occur, and because of the pattern that we see of even the criminal organizations playing the long game, trying to be stealthier about what they're doing such that they can go undetected for longer, explore deeper into the organization, try to get to those high value assets, they are now behaving more like nation state threat actors who have developed these approaches. Maybe not the physical access side of things, but anything that they can do remotely below the OS is now increasingly of interest to them because it enables them to be more stealthy. And so that is a concern. And so one area that we're increasingly hearing about is attacks that target the firmware on machines. And what we've done to try and counter that is there's actually some custom silicon that was actually created, the first version of it 10 years ago, which is what's called the platform root of trust on our machines. And it is, even when the machine appears to be off, it is powered. It's watching over the security of the platform. And then when you press the power button, it is going to inspect the firmware that's about to be executed to check that all of the digital signatures on it are correct before it allows the main CPU to start executing it. And we've seen over the last few years about how other devices like the iPhone and Android phones have now got security chips, things like the Apple T1 chip, the Google Titan chip. But within the PC world, until very recently, this was still unique. Some other vendors are now beginning to adopt first generation of this technology, but we're now up to our fifth generation. And one of the things which we introduced recently, maybe not a concern right now, but making sure that the signatures which we're checking are using quantum resistant cryptography, because we know that machines that we're selling now are going to be in the field in some cases for 10 years or more, and it's quite possible that a quantum computer is created during the next 10 years where they can break conventional cryptography. And we are seeing how certainly government organizations are now beginning to insist that anything they buy needs to be able to support quantum resistant cryptography. And so we've built that into our silicon to enable us to be able to do that. So it's maybe not a concern today, but over the lifetime of the machine, certainly for some customers it might become so. So we've sort of built that kind of capability into the silicon. And so the net result being that there could be an attack that aims to corrupt the firmware. And we've seen attacks like this happen in the past, which have compromised the firmware on the machine to provide persistent access in a very stealthy fashion. But because whenever you power the machine on, it checks those digital signatures, we're able to detect that. And crucially, we're always able to put the machine back to a known good state, because we keep a pristine copy of all of the firmware that is only accessible to the security controller. So if it ever spots a problem, it can just put a pristine copy of the firmware back onto the machine and the user is back up and running again. Whereas at best, other machines, that don't have this kind of capability would end up bricked. They'd just be displaying a black screen that have to go back to base. So we've shipped 150 million of these machines, and during that whole time, there's been zero persistent firmware compromises, because the digital signature checks are able to detect them, get the machine back to a known good state. That's not something other vendors are able to say. And it's that ability to not just detect problems, you need to be able to have that resilience to get back up and running without any user intervention. Also, we are using that sure start technology, able to defend against attacks like, I had talked about having a malicious device plugged into the machine when you power it on. Because our virtualization technology, our hypervisor, is built into the firmware of the machine, that code that is being supplied by the malicious device is going to be executed within a virtual machine, so that we can stop it from impacting the actual boot process. Again, that's come about by being able to do this work with the silicon vendors. So, as well as the actual firmware itself, there's the configuration of the firmware. So if you've ever gone into the BIOS F10 menu, there are a whole bunch of settings in there, some of which are critical to the security of the whole software stack. So obviously whether things like secure boot is enabled, but also things like which certificates to trust. All of that can be controlled from that menu. But also it can be controlled from the operating system. You can actually make calls into the firmware to change those settings. So if malware gets execution on your machine, it could potentially call in to the firmware to make changes to those configuration settings, perhaps disabling secure boot or adding an additional trusted certificate. And that would then enable it to install a rootkit. That would be very stealthy, difficult to detect, difficult to remove. And the only defense that you have against that is to configure on conventional machines is to configure an administrator password. Now who here configures BIOS administrator passwords on their machines?
Well, it's the same on every.
Yeah. So, well done for configuring a password, even if it is the same on every machine. It's a huge problem. I'd say that worldwide, 15% of customers configure a BIOS admin password, and for whatever reason, the Germans seem to generally do it, but hardly anybody else does. But the trouble is that if you don't configure a password, then malware running on the operating system can just call in and change those settings. And one of the things which we've seen over the last, during the course of this year is some of the standard off-the-shelf hacking toolkits, right? So not the sophisticated threat actors, but the folks where you can just buy the toolkit and use it yourself. Even some of those, now if you look at the information they collect about a machine, when they compromise it, they send a bunch of information to a command and control server. Usually that includes, what domain is this machine joined to, i.e. who owns it, various information about the machine. Some of that information now includes whether a BIOS admin password is configured on this machine. And that's obvious reconnaissance for them starting to exploit this information. So if you take anything from this talk, I would urge you to go and think about getting BIOS admin passwords installed on your machine, even if you can put the same one everywhere, because it's a huge pain to manage it. At least it's adding a barrier there. But one of the things I'd suggest that you might want to do is go searching on the dark web and see if you can find what that password is, because they quite often end up there. Any password which is replicated across a bunch of machines, you've had people coming in and out the company, it's often the case. So BIOS admin passwords are important for this reason, but they're a huge pain to manage. So what we want to do is come up with a way of avoiding that. And fortunately, you can do that using digital signatures. So on our machines, and this is something we backported to all of our machines made since 2018. There's an updated BIOS available for them that supports management of the BIOS configuration, of the firmware configuration, using public key cryptography. So you provision a machine with a public key, and then any changes to the firmware configuration need to be signed by the corresponding private key. So then you don't have that whole challenge of having a password replicated across all of your machines. This all becomes very easy to manage at that point. And you can actually even use it to enforce local access to the machine, because you might not want all of your users to have access to that BIOS F10 menu and going in and messing with the settings. So you can actually get it such that if you wish to, that if they want to access that menu, it displays a QR code. They then use a mobile phone app which is connected to your Active Directory, or Azure Active Directory, Enter ID as they call it now, where the user will be authenticated, possibly using two-factor authentication. We'll check their authorization, and if everything checks out, they will be given a one-time code which they can type in, which will get them access to that BIOS menu. We also use this mechanism actually in a whole bunch of other places. So you can configure machines that, for example, if someone takes the back cover off a machine, for whatever reason, it will go into a locked state where it won't allow the machine to boot until you've gone through this kind of authentication process. And for that one, it's unlikely that you would let any random user accept the, give them the one-time code to get past that. You'd probably require them to speak to someone in help desk and explain why they took the back cover off the machine before being handed a code to get them in and allow them to use it again. Also, just being able to lock the machine, something which I do if I'm traveling, going out to dinner, just for an extra level of security, I'll lock my machine so that it will display this QR code whenever it's turned on, and I'll have to use my mobile phone to unlock it, so that even if someone gets physical access to it, they won't be able to boot it and mess with it. So not only obviously do you want to worry about the firmware, but also the operating system as well. And whether there's a deliberately destructive attack or whether you just have a malware attack where you need to reinstall the OS to recover, or in fact, instance like the recent CrowdStrike one that made machines, well, not necessarily unbootable, but they would crash within a couple of minutes of booting. Getting the OS back on that machine as quickly and easily as possible, and doing it in a secure fashion. And because one of the things we see, certainly when it's malware attacks, the conventional tools that exist for getting the OS back on the machine, perhaps a recovery partition or the Windows reset capability, the bad guys are now aware of those approaches, and either they just disable them. If it's a destructive attack, they just might wipe the disk, so those recovery partitions are gone. Or some of the more sophisticated ones actually inject their malware into the recovery partition. So you go through the recovery operation, but the malware is pre-installed. So you failed to remove it. Whereas what we're able to do is, because using the security controller chip, we're operating below any of this software, any reliance on the hard disk. So we can always get the machine back to a known good state. We can get your enterprise image back on that machine, be able to check the digital signatures on it, know that it hasn't been tampered with, it's a pristine image, get the user back up and running again. And in fact, we can ship machines with additional flash memory where it stores a local copy of your enterprise image and updates it periodically, so that you've got a copy of it locally, so that when you do need to do a recovery, if you need to do a recovery operation, you're not reliant on just fetching it over the network. You've actually got a recent version of the corporate image ready locally, and that way you know that you can get the machine back up and running again in 7 minutes. That's how long it takes to put that back image back onto the hard disk. And so if you have a destructive attack which makes potentially thousands of devices unbootable, you've got a quick path to recovery, and that's something which organizations are increasingly. I think the CrowdStrike incident has really highlighted the vulnerability that many organizations had there about the ability to do security and manageability below the operating system. Because if the operating system isn't functioning properly, you need to be able to get back to a known good state. And just the last topic I wanted to talk about was this capability that we've created called Wolf Connect, where I said that security controller chip is always on. Even if the PC appears to be turned off, it is powered by the battery, consuming very small amounts of power. And what it can do is, we've given it a connection to the cellular modem, a wide area network modem, so that we're able to communicate with that machine, or enable the customer to communicate with their machine even when it appears to be powered off. So where that comes into play is, think about a scenario where you get out of an Uber, leaving your laptop stuck in the seat pocket in front of you. Well, you want to be able to try and get the device back, but you also want to be able to lock it to prevent anyone else from getting access to that device. And calling help desk, telling them that you've lost your machine, they can then issue a command over that basically IoT radio network to the device, telling it to turn the GPS on and to lock the device. So if anyone finds that device, they're going to power it on. It's going to be requiring a code before it's going to proceed to do anything. And the GPS is going to be turned on, so I'm going to be getting location reports of where that device is, helping me get reunited with it. And if I don't think I'm going to get that device back, I can then issue a wipe command to it. So you just destroy the contents of the drive and respond indicating that it's been, confirming that it's been done. So that's really just the first use case of what we're able to do with this, what we call Wolf Connect technology, to be able to manage devices even when they're off, even when they're not connected to a conventional network. We can still reach out and talk to it. And so find, lock, wipe is the first use case, but also being able to send out security events. Like if someone takes the back cover off a machine, as an IT admin, I want to know that that's happened, being able to send that information out over the radio. Being able to geofence a machine. So, in a hospital environment, that machine works up until you carry it out the door, and then it will automatically lock. There's perhaps waking up a machine to patch it or repair it. All of those kind of capabilities we can deliver using this technology, using effectively it's what's called a narrowband modem, where it's not for sending huge amounts of data, but just low power, being able to send small amounts of data to a machine to be able to issue commands to it. That is what's enabled by this technology, and it also integrates with conventional 4G, 5G modems as well. But it's works like with the Kindle, where you buy the device and it comes with the service. So you don't have to worry about putting a SIM in it or an eSIM. That's all handled as part of the service. That if you buy a device with Wolf Connect, you can then issue those management commands to it and get that telemetry back. And one of the things I should say is that it's you that's controlling that, because the keys that are provisioned are all your keys. We don't have them. They're not stored in our cloud, so there's no vulnerability where our cloud could be compromised and issue a wipe command to all of the Wolf Connect machines. That's just not possible because we just don't have the keys. That's the customer that controls the keys. We're just providing the conduit to enable you to deliver these management commands, these messages to your devices, passing through our cloud to over our wide area network. So anyway, I think we've kind of covered a whole bunch of topics there, but I guess the key thing I really wanted to get across is that security is something that we take really seriously at HP. I know every company says that, but I think you look back over HP's history, long before I got there, there's been 20 years of leadership in the PC world from a security perspective. There's been the HP Labs security lab, and there's so many things in the PC architecture that we take for granted today that were invented by that security lab and then put into HPC's PCs and then standardized across the industry. And that's very much the pattern that we're continuing to do, of trying to move the bar forward from an industry perspective. But here's just a sample of some of the things where we believe we have real differentiation today versus other vendors. And I apologize for all these messages appearing on my screen with all of the deep discussions we have with our silicon partners to get features built into the next generation of CPUs, what's happening there. But anyway, I'll finish on that note. If anyone's got any questions, happy to answer them. Just throw it open to anything.
What's the adoption of the whole security stack on your installed base in total?
So, in terms of, I don't think we've ever talked about specific numbers there, but it's north of of 10 million, say, of devices. I mean, of the full suite. There's other capabilities where, I put up figures like 150 million, that have got the security controller and are taking advantage of Sure Start and things like that. But of, Sure Click, it's north of 10 million.
How complicated is it to install the short click for an organization?
So, our goal is obviously to make it as easy as possible, and I think we do a pretty good job of that because, I will say that when we were, a startup company as Bromium, we were tending to work with very security sensitive, security mature organizations. I mean, half of our customers were government organizations, very, intelligence community, folks like that. But when HP acquired us, the goal was very much around, okay, let's take this very high-end security technology and make it available to everyone, and build it into the PCs. So you can actually buy PCs aimed at SMB customers, and soon you'll be able to do it for ones aimed at consumers too, that just have it all built in a way that just works out of the box. So it doesn't require any configuration at all, and you're getting 90% of the benefit. So it's very easy to get started. With enterprise customers, there's then they usually want to go a step further. So out of the box, you might have it, it would be configured such that anything coming in from outside is going to be untrusted. It's going to open in these virtual machines. But then the enterprise at some point usually says, well, actually, I don't trust stuff that's already inside. I want to add additional protections for that. And then it starts getting more complicated as you enable additional protections because, for example, you might have some internal spreadsheets that need to be able to talk to some internal database to pull stats from it. You probably don't want to be running that in a virtual machine, but probably most of your spreadsheets aren't like that, and and those ones can run in VMs. So it can get more complicated, but only you're already getting 90% of the value just with the out-of-the-box configuration, and then if you want to do more, we have professional services and partners that can help you do that. But I would say that many organizations just deploy it out of the box and don't do anything. Don't do any additional tweaking on top of that. They see that's where most of the value is coming from.
Any questions to Ian? So we're running out of time, but let's just a main advice for our customers listening today in terms of security strategy, taking it back to their organizations. What would that be?
Well, the BIOS admin password. If we know that people are going to start exploiting that exploiting the lack of a password configuration because they're already doing the reconnaissance for it. So if you have a HP fleet, enable Sure admin. Even if you've got old machines, they probably support it. If you don't have a HP fleet, enable a BIOS admin password everywhere. I think that's good advice. I obviously, really believe in these technologies that are using virtualization, using the hypervisor to contain threats, and then also, protecting the things that you care most about. And I think that, they really make a difference to your security posture. And whether you start with trying to contain threats or whether you start with the privileged users and trying to protect them, we know that these technologies stop the lateral movement occurring, which turns sort of simple endpoint breaches into expensive, enterprise breaches. And so I think those are technologies that, are worth looking at, and have, customers that deployed them have had good outcomes.
Thank you so much for today, Ian. We give a applause for.